Hello and welcome and good evening to this, our last, unfortunately, Insight Into session of the year. So welcome everybody to this Insight Into meeting, which is all about graphic design and advertising. I'm Mrs. Norton, Head of Sixth Form at Manchester High here, and we have several speakers tonight. So first of all, in a few moments, I'll be introducing you to Nicola Stockdale. She left Manchester High in 2018. And she's brand marketing coordinator for Lego Company, which is really exciting. We've also got with us tonight Ali Simpson, who left school in 2013, and she's a senior graphic designer and a freelancer for a whole range of companies, so she'll be sharing her experiences with us. And finally, we have Olivia Leviton, who left in 2008, and she's a freelance creative director, and again, she'll be talking to us about her experiences in this industry. Once our speakers have finished their presentations, Ms. Hannon, our Head of Careers, will talk to you all about routes into this kind of area if you're interested in pursuing this at degree level or beyond. And we do, of course, have our chat Q&A function. So if you have any questions throughout the evening, just pop them in the Q&A box to the side of your screen. And at the end of the presentations, I will ask our speakers any questions that we might have. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Nicola, who's going to tell us all about her experiences. So welcome, Nicola. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Nicola, and like you said, I left in 2018. Luckily, I've been recently promoted to an associate brand manager, which is very exciting, in the Western Europe marketing team at the Lego Group. And currently I'm covering our Lego Duplo theme, so our really young kiddie one, 4+, and then I'm also covering our really popular Lego Friends and Classic and Creator. So really covering our younger audience, which is very exciting and very new to me. For today's presentation, I'm kind of going to tell you a little bit about my job, what I do every day, why I love it so much, and then also talk a little bit about how I got to this point, how I made this journey towards becoming a brand manager. I think it's interesting to say that our other presenters tonight are from an agency side, and I'm sat in-house, so I'm sat in a company or a brand. And I think it'll be good to really get that perspective of the two different sides of graphic design and advertising. Another little intro to make is to the Duplo bunny on these slides. I've hidden him throughout the slides and the presentation just as a bit of fun, so keep an eye out for him. But yeah, move on to the next slide, please. So how did I get here? And I don't mean this call, I do know how I got here, but how did I get into this role at the Lego Group, and how did I get into marketing? Well, actually, if you told my year 7 self that I was going to be in marketing, I would have kind of scoffed at you. I really wanted to be a vet and go into science. And that was something that I really wanted to do for quite a long time. But then I started doing graphic design in year 9 with, first of all, it was Mrs. Scott, and then I had Mr. Vance as a teacher, and I just fell in love with it. I really enjoyed it. I was never much of an artist. Give me a paintbrush and I kind of will draw I'll paint something that looks like something your 2-year-old might paint you. But with graphic design, with doing something digital, I just had so much fun with it, and it was really good fun. If you move on to the next slide, I'm going to embarrass myself now with some pictures from my time at school. Yes, that's year 7 first day. I've changed quite a lot, or not a lot as well. So to give you a bit of an overview in terms of what I studied, I did all the core subjects, obviously. I did further maths for some reason, and then I did graphic design, French and Latin as well. And these were subjects that I chose because I really enjoyed them, and that was the only reason I chose them. Although I knew I wanted to go into science, it was really important to me and my mum for me to choose something that I was passionate about, because you never know what life's going to throw at you. You never know how things are going to change. But if you're studying something that you enjoy, that makes it a whole lot easier. Then kind of going into 6th form, I still had this idea that I wanted to go into science. And when I first came into 6th form, I actually wanted to go into epidemiology, which actually, considering what happened, maybe I made it well there. So halfway through, I changed my mind and decided that actually doing something creative was what was going to get me out of bed. And so I started to explore a little bit what's out there. What can I do at university that's something creative? What skills do I have that I want to explore a little bit further? As well as doing my studies, extracurricular, I love to be involved in a little bit of everything. I was part of sports clubs, water polo was a favourite, science clubs, I was part of Young Enterprise and the Real Business Challenge team that we had. If there was anything competitive, that was definitely a plus for me because I really enjoyed that. But yeah, I kind of seized every opportunity that was thrown at me and really tried to make the most out of my time. If you move on to the next slide, I then went to university and I went on to study digital media at the University of Leeds. And how I got to choosing that course was that I wanted to really kind of keep my opportunities broad. I knew I wanted to do something creative and really kind of build on my graphic design that I was enjoying, but I didn't want to choose something too narrow too soon. So that's where I steered away from doing a pure graphic design course and tried to explore what else there was out there. And actually, Mr. Vance was the one that sent me this course at University of Leeds, so he's to thank for all this. And I just really loved it, and I had the best time for the first year, and then we went into lockdown, but it was still quite good. My tips, I guess, for university and trying to choose what course to do, especially when you have creativity and it's so broad, is I actually looked at the place first that I wanted to kind of be. I knew I didn't want to be too far away from home, but I also knew that I wanted to be far enough away, if that makes sense. And Leeds, I kind of fell in love with. And through that, then looking at the courses that was there, I discovered this course with Mr. Vance, and I fell in love with it. So the course I did was 3 years. It had an optional extra year in industry, which I'm glad I didn't opt for because it was quite difficult with COVID. But if you go to the next slide, I want to show some examples of the breadth of the work that we did. We did some really theoretical modules. We did a speaking module looking into speech making and analysing speech. We did a module on promotional culture, so looking at adverts like the one in the top right corner and how it has developed over the years for the better. I did my dissertation on looking at how advertising helped bring women into sailing. And I'm actually wearing a Man High Leavers hoodie there, which I didn't realise. As well as that, we looked into celebrity, gaming, digital media and society, internet privacy, anything digital we kind of had a look at, and it was really, really interesting. If we move to the next slide. We also did do creative stuff though as well. So I got to have a go at programming and coding, which is something I'd never done before. Graphic design was still a really big component, and keeping that going throughout it and how we can apply that, not just into creating pieces of artwork, but actually how we can apply that into marketing, presentations and that kind of thing. We did modules on user interface design, apps and that kind of thing. And we even did film and camera and photography, which was great, and a module on working in creative digital teams, which actually it was probably one of the most useful modules I did, because creatives working together, that's something that's tricky. But what I wanted to say before I move on to more talking about my job is that university isn't the only route for doing this. And I really enjoyed my time at university, but I know plenty of people that I work with that didn't go. There's lots of apprenticeships, there's lots of work experience opportunities, especially in marketing and the creative industries. And I think my tip for you is that try and start building a portfolio. And I don't mean something really, really professional or really formal, but just if you enjoy graphic design, photography, art, start to try and create some pieces of work that you like, store them, put them away somewhere, and over time develop this portfolio that you'll have behind you, and it might help you discover what you're really interested in. It might help you with a job application, your university application, and so it's really great to kind of do that self-discovery and really look into that. If you move on to the next slide, I think it's also important to talk about outside of education and what I did in terms of outside of being at school and at university. And one of my big passions is doing sailing. And very luckily, I went on a school trip in 2013 to Debdale Outdoor Centre, and we did lots of water sports activities. I think it was the end of year 8. And I absolutely adored it, and I joined the club. And then they never really got rid of me. I stayed as a volunteer and I worked up to becoming an instructor. And I think this really helped me build some really valuable skills that you maybe won't get in a classroom, and how to have those interpersonal skills, leadership, how to interact with people. And as also part of that, I did a lot of work for advocating for disadvantaged sailors, especially children coming from different backgrounds, and also helping to promote some more diverse leadership in sailing. I like to use the phrase that sailing is male, pale and stale, if you get where I'm going there. And so I tried to do the best I could to help diversify a little bit, try and bring in some more female leadership, try and bring in some more diverse leadership from different age groups and different ethnicities. And this is still ongoing, but it's definitely started to improve. I think it's also quite important, I guess, to talk about my other passions. And the reason I'll tell you this is in a minute. So I really enjoy video gaming. I like gardening, I like animals, and it might seem a bit random, but actually these passions that you have, these things, it might be something really small, it might be something really big. Keep going with these, keep feeding into this, even when things are really stressful. Keep having this passion, because you never know when this could then feed into your career or your education. I think one point to make here is about video gaming. In the last year at the Lego Group, I ended up with the opportunity to get involved in a video gaming project purely because someone knew that I really enjoyed it. And that's actually helped me to figure out that actually later down the line, that might be something I want to go into a little bit more. So yeah, just keep doing what you enjoy and keep finding different things to do and keeping that up, because there's a lot to the world out there. So if you move on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more about my job now. So this on the slide here is a couple of examples of work that I've been involved with. We have a giant Bowser statue there that was toured around different comic conventions last year to help advertise our new Bowser set that was coming out. We've got the new Lego bouquet there that is very, very popular, and that was a campaign that I've just recently worked on, especially for Valentine's Day. We also had an influencer campaign where we helped create an influencer box for the region, and then the Minecraft one there as well, where we did a music campaign, quite interestingly. But being a brand manager is quite different to maybe just being focused on graphic design and advertising. A brand manager is kind of required to know everything about the brand they are managing. So for example, for Duplo, I need to know all about the campaigns that are running at the moment, what products we have launching, what we've already got out there, how are they performing, what's the general toy industry doing, what else is going on that you might need to know about, you know, a pandemic, for example, that can impact things. And so it's really about kind of having this overarching view. But also as part of it, you have the marketing and the advertising and these campaigns that we run to help try and sell the products. And I thought the best way to kind of explain this was to take you through a product launch. So if you go to the next slide, I have the example here of a product that we'll be launching on the 1st of March. This is a very, very sweet Lego Duplo product, and it's part of our new organic garden range, and they're very, very sweet. But actually, there is a lot of work that has gone on behind the scenes to make sure that on the 1st of March, we can launch this product and for it to be successful. So all the way back in 2021, we as brand managers will have been involved with the designers up in Billund in Denmark, who will have been coming up with ideas for these sets, and we will have gone into that with some insights and some information about how other sets have done to help feed into that and help create what this is. Then around summer last year, we then will have briefed our internal agency. So at Lego, we have our own design agency internally. And we will have told them, we've got this product that's going to be launching in March next year. We would like to have a campaign that goes with it, that's going to celebrate everything about learning through play and helping children to discover the world around them. And so they will have then taken that brief away, and then they came back to us with a marketing campaign. And that includes ideas for advertising videos, so the kind of adverts that you'll see on TV or on YouTube, and they're quite annoying sometimes. It includes looking at brochures. It includes online social media assets. It includes things like just updating our homepage on the website to include pictures of the new stuff that we've got coming out. And so we'll have been involved in that process all the way through. And actually having that graphic design background is very useful when it comes to this, because it helps me to really understand how something's going to look and how it should develop. And then if you just move to the next slide, I'll just give you some visual guides, I guess, for the kinds of things that we're looking at. So YouTube content will be involved in trying to come up with ideas for what we need to create for the region and making sure that that gets created and talking to the agency. Social media posts, are we going to do an Instagram story or an Instagram post, and how is that going to look? How are people going to interact with it? Who are the audience? The brochure up top there is for these products, and we were really involved in how that was going to look, how we were going to communicate, how it was going to help children learn. We have lots of other touch points. We have a Lego Kids magazine. We've got apps that we communicate to children through, and then of course we have the website. And I think this is all really super important stuff for helping us to launch the product. And in terms of the advertising, it's something that as brand managers, we don't necessarily create these things, but we have a lot of input and we know the audience best that we're trying to communicate to. And so that's where we'll work together with the designers to make sure that we're going to get that. So I guess to wrap it all up a little bit, I wanted to give some advice to anyone that's wanting to go into creative, but actually to do anything. I guess it's something that you can apply to your personal life or to your work life. So if you move to the next slide. Give it a second. Whilst it changes, at Lego we have these leadership characteristics, and we really try to encompass these in everything that we do as employees. And it's to be brave, to be curious, and to be focused. But what does that actually mean when you try and apply that to yourself? So when being brave, it's about trying to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And really, it's important learning to advocate for yourself. So people will help you, opportunities might be offered to you, but actually, if there's something that you really want to do or something you enjoy, it's a skill to try and learn to advocate for yourself and create those opportunities and find those exciting things. In terms of being curious, always ask questions. There's never ever too many. Always ask yourself why. Why is it that I want to study it? Why do I enjoy that? My mum said that my favourite word as a child was why. So you know, I think it's really helped. And finally, be focused. And it's kind of about having this goal mindset, but goals don't just have to be that you want to, you know, I want to be a CEO in 5 years or something. Like goals can be, I want to be happy. I want to have a happy life. And it's about asking yourself those questions. Okay, so what makes me happy? What do I enjoy? How can I make sure that I will be happy? And it's about having that mindset and having that focus to then try and pursue those goals. And so I think it's something that's really important. You can apply to your studies, personal life, your work life, and it's just a really, really great message that we have as Lego employees. And that's it. Thanks.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Nicola. I was so kind of lost in that and looking at all those lovely Lego products and kind of imagining what a lovely job it sounds like that you've got. It sounds really enjoyable, really fun, but also very focused. And very kind of productive in that sense. And I must admit, I've got children who are much older now, but I looked at that little Lego set and I thought, that would have been something that I would have bought. It looks lovely. So thank you for all of those insights, and you know, the kind of advice that you've given is brilliant. I really like that. Be brave, be curious, be focused. Is really, really good advice for anything, actually, no matter what career or line of work or study that you go into. So lots of really, really useful and interesting things there. And I will tell Mr. Vance that you got a shout out. He'll be very pleased to hear about that. So as I mentioned before, there is space in the Q&A box for some questions, and any that get posted to us, we'll ask at the end. I'll ask the speakers at the end. So do carry on to put your questions in there. And I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, Ali, who left Man High in 2013. So I'm going to hand over now to Ali. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hello, I'm Ali Simpson and I'm a senior graphic designer and freelancer, well, was a freelancer for 12 global companies. I attended Man High right from year 1 to university. So I am a Man High girl quite through and through. It is really exciting to be back virtually, and thanks for having me. If we could go to the next slide. So I just thought it'd be quite useful, first of all, to show this like visual timeline of what I've been doing. My graphic design journey really started when I was picking my GCSEs. I still remember I was weighing up whether or not I should take geography or graphic design. I'd seen lots of the design work up in the halls from the girls in the years above, but I didn't really know much about it, and I'd done geography for 3 years already, so I was kind of like, is this a risk taking a subject I don't know much about? But on the day I made the decision to do graphic design, and I haven't looked back since. At A-level, I took graphic design, psychology and English language. And to be honest, at this point, I knew that I loved design. I knew I was good at it, and I knew it was something I was really wanting to pursue. This mentality, by the way, is not very common. I think most people don't have a clue what they want to do or where they want to go, and that is completely normal and nothing to worry about. Most of my friends still don't know what they want to do. But for myself, I'd found something that I was really passionate about, and so that was something that I wanted to pursue. After Man High, I had a few options. Basically, with creative courses, some people take an art foundation, which is where you can experiment within like all the fields of art and design before finally picking what you want to do as your uni course. Personally, I wasn't very keen on this. I'd been to some talks that were on other areas of design, such as like animation, illustration, 3D, fashion, but I decided they weren't really for me, and I did really want to do graphic design. I'm not sure what it's like now, but when I was applying for uni, there were only 3 that really did graphic design, so I applied to them and luckily went to my first choice, which was Leeds. Leeds seems to be getting a bit of a shout out today. But honestly, uni was the best few years of my life, and I really wish I could go back and do it all over again. But yeah, I'll speak about the rest of the timeline as I go through. But yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the pictures on here show the School of Design at Leeds, which is where I spent most of my time. One of the good things about Leeds is that even though it's a city uni, all of the buildings are in one place, so you sort of feel like you've got your own campus, which is really nice. It was such a cool city to be a student in, and I learned so much about myself, not only creatively but also personally, and yeah, it was honestly just amazing. So what was my university experience? The first year I was getting used to uni life, but I wasn't actually sure about my course. It was a lot more theoretical than I was expecting. Looking back, I think it was because they wanted to make sure that people were at the same level before going into second year, but I was finding it quite dry, and I genuinely actually wasn't sure if I wanted to carry on with it. It was very, very different than what I'd done at GCSE and A-level, but luckily I stuck with it, and my second year was really incredible. I had so many good tutors, it was really interesting, and I also took additional modules which I enjoyed, such as photography. During my second year, our tutors gave us a design brief that was set by a company called YCN. This is global design competition, and you enter your ideas with the chance to win an award. This is where I have to say, take every opportunity that you can, because I remember being one of the only people on my course who actually submitted the work to the competition in the end. And I never thought in a million years that I would win it, but I did. And this is what actually got me my work placement for my 3rd year. So it really was worth it. If we could go to the next slide, please. As you can see on the screen, that's me winning the award. The YCN award that I won was for a brief set by Gap, and off the back of it I was given the opportunity to work with Gap for a month in their EU department. On the right you can see the campaign. It was for Student Freshers Week, and the concept was that it spoke to students who at the time would have definitely owned a Gap hoodie or a pair of Gap jeans, and it played on that like 90s nostalgia with the Polaroids and tagline "You'll grow into it." So yeah, all of these assets came to life, and it was really cool because it was the first campaign I did that I got to see in a store, in like for a proper real life brand, and I'd been able to get involved in it from the start to finish, helping on the photography shoot, working with the models, and then actually creating the physical assets for them. From this month internship that I did, off the back of the YCN award, I'd heard that there was a job going in the franchise division of the company, and I applied, and because I'd had my foot in the door with the internship, I ended up getting a full year's placement out of it, which was really great. After my year in industry, I went back to uni, finished my final year. This consisted of a few big creative projects and a dissertation, which was a bit of a shock because I hadn't written any essays since A-level. But honestly, it was actually fine, because I know a lot of people are worried about dissertations. I know I was. But yeah, this final year was my kind of like last chance to experiment before going out into the world of work. And luckily, at the end of my final year, I got a call from my manager that I'd had at Gap, and they had another role going, which I applied for and got the job. So yeah, again, if I hadn't have taken that opportunity and applied to the YCN, I would have never got it. Next slide, please. So here I just thought I'd pop in a little quote that I absolutely love. It's so simple but so true. You never notice good design, you always notice bad design. When people ask me what graphic design is or what I do, I always say this to them. A lot of the time people don't really know what your job entails, but it is so important. Every single like advert you've seen or piece of packaging you've picked up, from a water bottle to a really cool album cover, it's been designed. Websites you use every day, apps, they're all designed too. It is quite literally everywhere. Just think, have you ever been onto like a website or an app and it looks terrible or it doesn't work very well, and you end up just going off it because it annoys you? Well, that's bad design. If the design is good, you'll stay on the website and you'll prefer the brand, and you'll hopefully buy the product that they're trying to sell you. Next slide, please. During my career, there's been a lot of different design outputs that I've worked with. The first major avenue I took was print design, and I did this after uni for Gap, Banana Republic and Old Navy. As you can see on the screen, I designed store windows. On the top left was a bespoke window that was for the Dubai Mall for Christmas, and the image on the right shows an in-store setup I did for Diwali in India. And I also got to do more experiential pop-ups, like the large Gap 3D lettering you can see on the bottom left. Next slide, please. I also did similar things at this time for Banana Republic and Old Navy, but I got to branch out into digital a bit more, where I was designing like emails that were sent out to our internal partners. From this, I learned how much I enjoyed doing digital, and it like a lot more than print. So I knew that digital was what I really wanted to go into next. Next slide, please. So I quit my job with Gap, Banana Republic and Old Navy after a few years. This is mostly just because I felt like I'd achieved all that I could in the role and there wasn't really that much room for progression. So I took a little break. I'd worked non-stop since school and I decided, right, it's time to do a bit of travelling. Went around Southeast Asia, but unfortunately had to come back because of COVID. When I was back, I was luckily introduced through a friend from uni who I also did design with to a really great contact who she knew from working at the Discovery Channel. The contact had lots of big clients and she got me some freelance gigs that were really great for brands. That were really great brands such as BBC, Red Bull, Formula One and Discovery Plus. If you're unsure what freelancing means, because I know I had no clue for a long time, it's basically when you're self-employed or hired by an agency to do day work, rather than being employed full-time by one company. Freelancing can be quite a good way to build your portfolio because it means you're working on lots of different projects and creative assets rather than working for one brand. You can see on the slide some of the work that I did whilst I was freelancing. As you can see, it's all quite different. Some of it was designing social posts and other bits were mocking up how a pop-up could look or designing websites. Next slide, please. During this time, I got a message on LinkedIn from Bondi Sands. If you haven't already, please get LinkedIn. It's honestly the best way to get a job nowadays. Add as many people as you can in the field that you're in, and you'll have recruiters and job opportunities all in one place. It's helped me so much when I've been looking for work, and it's generally just a really great place to network. But yeah, I worked for Bondi Sands for 6 months. It was a maternity cover freelance role where I was mostly doing digital work, such as customer facing emails. So when you go into your emails and you've got like emails from brands, that's the sort of stuff that I was designing, as well as paid ads. So like if you're scrolling through your Instagram or Facebook, you might see these pop up. But yeah, there was loads of other things that I was doing for them as well as that. But yeah, I also did a bit of print design, which I know I said I wasn't as interested in, but it does sort of come into the role a bit. But yeah, again, this was a really, really rewarding experience because I actually designed a Christmas packaging box for them, which got put into Boots. So I could go out to the shop and see what I'd designed, which it's always such a surreal feeling as a designer, and the novelty definitely does not wear off. I absolutely loved working for Bondi Sands. It was an amazing company and I got on really well with everybody there, but unfortunately it was a freelance role, so it did end after the 6 months. When it ended, I was a little bit nervous because when you are freelancing, if you don't have a lot of clients, you can feel a little stressed about when you'll next get work. So from that, I knew that I really wanted to go into a full-time role again, and lockdown was lifting, so people were starting to hire, which was great. Having said this, just because freelance wasn't for me, I do have loads of friends who freelance and they absolutely love it. There's advantages to this for sure. You can travel as you work. You can work your own hours, you can work the days that you want to work, but I would probably recommend this once you've built up a bit of a client base and have networked rather than just off the bat. Next slide, please. So I got a job with Bluebella pretty much as soon as my contract ended with Bondi Sands. I was contacted through a recruiter on LinkedIn, so like I said, definitely worth getting. and Blue Bella is where I've been ever since. It's a lingerie and nightwear company. You may have seen it on Instagram. It's a really cool brand. We work with lots of influencers and celebrities. If you're a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race, we used some of the stars in our last Pride campaign, which you can see on the slide. I really love working for Blue Bella and feel like it's a great fit for me personally. I believe in the brand, first of all, and secondly, its values align to mine. They believe in expressing individual style and spirit, and its vision is to promote female empowerment, which I really love. The amount of people who work in the company is fairly small, but I personally prefer that because I feel like I have a bigger voice and a lot of creative freedom, which is rare when you're working for bigger brands. It's my favourite job by far, and I'm constantly learning and progressing in the role, which, like I mentioned before, is important to me. Within my team, I work closely with one other designer, as well as the rest of the marketing team. We work on multiple campaigns at once from start to finish, which means coming up with the creative identity for a campaign and then designing all of the assets that go along with it. This can include email newsletters that are sent out to customers, paid ads, social content, motion graphics, website content, and all sorts of other things. But yeah, during my time at Blue Bella, I've also worked on bigger growth projects, such as redesigning the whole website, which was a huge bit of work and is actually what helped me get promoted from being midweight to senior designer. In addition, I get to work hybrid, which is important to me. I go into the office 2 days a week and can work from home for the other 3, which means I do have like more time for myself. I can go to the gym or like do other things that I couldn't do when I was in the office 5 days a week. And the company have also been really supportive with other goals I've had outside of work, such as go on a 3-week trek up Everest. So yeah, that's my journey in a wrap. But really quickly to summarise, I'd say follow what you're passionate in. Don't give up if you have one bad year. Take opportunities that come your way, and don't worry if you think you can't do it. Just be brave. I honestly believe that being passionate about something is the most important part to any career. So yeah, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and thank you for listening.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That's really, really interesting. It's very different to what Nicola was talking about. I can totally see the other side of being freelance, but equally, there are a lot of things you had in common. The practicalities of what you do, there's a lot of it's very similar, but also the messages about following your passion and don't give up and being brave and, you know, following what you like to do, because that can convert into a really successful and sort of positive experience work-wise for you, which is fantastic. And really interesting to see all of those different companies and brands that you've worked with. And also at university, I like that notion of you just grabbed that one opportunity and it led to so many different things. It really snowballed. So I think that's something as well as about, you know, grabbing those opportunities, and something that may seem relatively minor at initially can really become something really important. So that's a really good lesson for any career. So thank you. That's really, really interesting. And we will come back to you for questions at the end. So I'd now like to introduce Olivia, or Liv, and she's going to talk about her journey at school and her work experience and her work at the moment. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Olivia, and over to you.
Cool. Can everyone see my screen first up? I'll take that as a yes because I can't hear anyone, but okay. So first of all, just to kind of tell you a little bit about me. So I am Liv Leviton. I work with brands and in advertising agencies as a creative director. So that means that my job is to think about the ideas that are behind the advertising campaigns and then see them through to production. I've worked with a whole host of brands, including Mini Cars, Domino's Pizza, the Mayor of London, Samsung, Wix. So really kind of promoting everything as trivial as takeaway pizza right through to women's rights, as I led a campaign for the Mayor of London a couple of years ago that was all aimed to boost women's equality in London. But I'll speak a bit more about that later. I graduated from Manchester High in 2008. I then went on a gap year travelling. This photo bottom right is of me and my fellow Manhire Lucy when we were in Tanzania after just having been chased by a wild elephant. So that's definitely a memory that stands out. I then went on to study psychology at Nottingham University. And at this time, you know, I really didn't know what I wanted to do after that. I just knew that I was interested in people, the decisions that we make as humans. And yeah, so it was really a decision that was made on kind of what I was interested in there and then. And I kind of didn't really give it much thought as to where exactly it was going to lead me. I wanted to keep doors open. You might be wondering what ET is kind of doing phoning home in the top corner of the screen. So 4 years ago, I actually got married to my Manchester Grammar School sweetheart, but he does have a rather unfortunate surname. So I actually became Mrs. Alien. But yeah, it's no wonder that I actually go by my maiden name Leviton for work. So moving on to the Man High days. So I always had a real love for graphics, like, you know, and I was obsessed with doing my graphics work. You know, had an amazing teacher in Mr. Vance and Mrs. Scott. I did it for GCSE and right through to A-level. This is a picture that I managed to dig out somewhere, which is of a project that I absolutely loved, basically creating leaflets for London Fashion Week. And the idea was that people could take them off the skirt, but I, you know, like designed the mannequin, made the mannequin from scratch, stitched the sash together. And I've always had a very hands-on approach. Often I would kind of take elements that I love from the fine art classes and incorporate them into graphics. So I would kind of be a lot more hands-on than I didn't like spending too much time just solely on the computer, even though it was, you know, through graphics at school where I learned how to use the Adobe suite, which, you know, like Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator, and I still use those every single day in my career now. But yeah, this kind of love of craft and making things, I still have very much, and I try and take that into every single brief that I work on, because for me the craft is so incredibly important, and the small decisions of how you bring something to life is, I really believe, what can make the difference between content that people engage with and content which is just scrolled past. But yeah, I had this real love for graphics and creativity, but you know, the truth is at the time I had absolutely no idea, other than it being a passion, where it could lead, unless I wanted to be an arts teacher or an artist. I really didn't know any of the creative avenues that I could go to other than those things. So as I said, I went to uni in Nottingham, but during one summer I actually did an internship at an advertising agency. And it was the first time that I really saw that there was another avenue to go down in the creative field. And it's kind of funny because, you know, we see ads and brands, they exist all over the place. Every time you go on social media, every time you step out the door on a bus or on a billboard or wherever you are. But I had really never given any thought before about the process that behind them, that existed behind them, and the thought that went into them. And this internship actually taught me that process. So just how do ad agencies work? So first of all, there's the client. So let's just say, I'll give you an example here, that might be Domino's Pizza, or, you know, as Nicola was saying before, she obviously works for Lego, so they also would be the client in this scenario. And let's say that they have a brief, Domino's Pizza, that they want to sell yummy pizzas to 15 to 21-year-old males. You then have the account managers, who are agency side. So they're like the middlemen. They're also known as client services. So this is the middlemen between the rest of the agency and the client. So they will take the brief from the client and they'll pass it on to strategy and on to creative. the account managers are responsible for the relationship with the client. They ensure that the brief is being answered, but also on the other side of things, that when we think of a creative concept, it's already justified when the client actually sees it. Then there's strategy. So strategy will take the brief that the client has given and that the account managers have given to them, and they'll think, how can we actually root this in reality? So for example, the strategist will think, okay, we know that gamers are a core proportion of 15 to 21-year-old males, and takeaway pizza is the perfect accompaniment to a games night. It's easy, it's tasty, it's fast. So that's kind of really rooted in a truth. And then it gets passed on to creative to actually think, okay, with all this knowledge, what's actually the idea? So obviously I kind of want to zoom into the creative because this is where my role comes in. So the creative department is made up of copywriter and art director pairs. So these pairs work together as a team to come up with concepts and then see them through to production, whereby the copywriter is responsible for what the ad says and the art director is responsible for how it looks. So in my instance, I started as an art director. And, you know, it's a very rare, unique kind of relationship in a work environment, because this person, like, you are literally in a relationship with them. Like, you work with them every single day. You probably see them more than you see your partner. You need to have a really honest relationship to feel completely comfortable to throw ideas around, to tell each other if something just isn't working or isn't good. You've got to support each other. You literally move through your career together. So yeah, it has an intensity to it, but it's also, I mean, if you've kind of ever tried to think of an idea before, how useful it is just having that person to bounce off. And it's also kind of a really lovely thing to have that relationship, that you work so closely with someone in work as well. But yeah, very importantly, the output, the art and the copy, they have to work together. They should never be saying the same thing. They have to enhance each other. So what I mean by that is, if you had a picture of a dog, the copy shouldn't explicitly mention a dog anywhere. They have to kind of together form a picture of whatever it is that they want to say. So it's quite a good, interesting experiment, actually. Next time you see an advert, just see how you think that the visuals are enhancing the copy and vice versa. And if they don't, then I would say that it's not a very good ad. But yeah, and also just particularly on this example that I've put on this page, just to say, you know, sometimes the absence of imagery actually says more. So I think what's very interesting about this ad is it doesn't actually have any imagery to it, but you instantly know that this is a McDonald's advert, even though very rarely it doesn't even have a logo on it. And that's because of the colours used, the font face used, the formatting of it brings to life this idea. So sometimes you might not explicitly see imagery, but the visual effect overall is so important, and how well that visual effect is actually working to bring this copy to life in this example. But, you know, perhaps we've kind of jumped a little bit into talking about execution, but actually it's worth thinking about what comes before this point. Before the execution, we have to talk about the idea. My father-in-law laughs at me when he said that, you know, he can't believe that my job is to think, but it really is. And it might initially sound funny, but actually being told to think of an amazing idea on cue or to a very tight timeline can actually be very tough. So how do I do it? I thought I'd share with you a bit about my process. Okay, so first of all, you have to find a problem. So what is the issue that we are trying to solve? This could be as trivial as chewing gum runs out of taste after 5 minutes, or as serious as there's not equal opportunity for women. So, you know, that comes down to entirely what the brand is and what it is they're wanting to say. Then it's really important to find an anchor. So why do we have the right to talk about it? I especially think in this day and age where we literally have less than 3 seconds to grab someone's attention on social media, authenticity is absolutely key. As a brand, you have to truly have the right to be talking about something, otherwise you'll just completely lose your audience. And then finally, solve the problem. So, you know, this one speaks for itself and is where you kind of have to think what you're going to do with the creative idea. So just to bring this to life for you, we'll do it with the Mayor of London client. So I'm going to tell you about a brief that I actually did work on a couple of years ago. So the problem was that women do not have equal opportunity in London. The anchor and why the Mayor of London could talk about this is obviously as a brand, there's just complete accessibility there from business leaders right at the top all the way through to, you know, women who are just starting out in their careers. So there's the accessibility to speak to these people, but also as the Mayor of London, there's also the gravitas that actually something can be done to change it. And then solving the problem. So we thought, okay, well, we need to celebrate women and raise awareness of this issue in businesses. So just kind of what's my creative process? Where do I start? This is just a window into my mind. So the first place I will go every single time I get a brief is just spider diagrams galore. I will write at the centre, this is actually a brief I'm working on at the moment for a sports brand, but I'll write at the centre of it something core that we need to get across. Maybe that's the proposition that's going to be behind the idea. And then I'll just write everything that comes to my head. And it's kind of amazing the however random you think things are, just when you get them down, the connections that you start to make, and then the thoughts that kind of will spark from something that will then spark something else, and it kind of goes on and actually can, well, it always does end up in a concept that I'll then, you know, put into a proper slide and properly present to people. But something that does tend to happen is you can just reach a brick wall. You know, the thing with this role is an idea could come to you an hour after being briefed. It could come to you in the middle of the night, or it could just, you know, you might be presenting the next day and be stressing that you just haven't thought of anything good. So I call that when you're at the brick wall. And something that I always kind of do when I reach that point is I just try and have to completely refresh the way I've been thinking about something. And so quite a fun little creative exercise is basically think of the brief, you then think of the most random thing you can think of, and then just try and connect the two in an idea. So as an example, let's say the brief is to advertise Cadbury's cream egg. And then the most random thing you can think of, a vacuum cleaner. So how can we bring these together in an idea? Maybe we can immerse our audience in the making of a cream egg, seeing it whirl around to create its creamy texture. So, you know, even the most random thoughts can actually be made relevant. And this is just so helpful for breaking that brick wall and just bringing fresh perspective for something that you've been working on. And you would be surprised, like more often than not, it actually results in really good and surprising ideas that you would never have otherwise thought of. It also can result in some really shocking ideas, but also some very good ones. So just to touch on my personal journey within this space. So I actually started off in the account management side of things. So after studying psychology at Nottingham, I then was lucky enough to get on a grad scheme at a big advertising agency called Iris in London. And it was a really interesting time to join the advertising world, because it was when social had really only just become a thing for brands. And, you know, we're not talking about TikTok, about Instagram, we're going back to like brands having a Facebook page. So it was really like the early days. And the reason it was interesting is because none of these brands knew how they should behave on social media. You know, are they purely is it purely for community care that they're existing, or should they have more of a tone of voice? You know, should it be a physical person that's representing their brand, or is it just still quite faceless? And, you know, no one knew. And so it was a really great opportunity to be part of a team that was actually kind of shaping and giving purpose to why these brands should be existing on social media. So when I first joined, I worked across the Philips, Barclaycard and Mini accounts. But a couple of years in, you know, I kind of felt like, even though I was obviously involved in a creative industry and exposed to creative work, I really wanted to be selling my own ideas. Now, traditionally, everybody in the creative department had been to ad school, they'd studied creative advertising at university. So, you know, my background in psychology, it didn't ladder up in the traditional sense to get into the creative department. So I knew I was kind of going to have to be proactive if I wanted to get in there. So I actually built up my own portfolio. I learned how to build a website. I kind of answered my own briefs. I made briefs up for brands, went and answered them, housed them in this website, made connections within the agency, in the creative department, and really kind of created an opportunity for myself to move over to that department. And then I was lucky that a few months later, an opportunity came about for me, and they thought of me to move in, and that's when I started my career as an art director. It was kind of interesting because obviously 90% of the creative department, as I mentioned, they had come from a similar background. They had, done the same course at university. But for me, actually, it was kind of a superpower that I hadn't come from that background. My psychology degree and just my own path gave such diversity in thought, and I would kind of always really champion that it's so important to have diversity in background, and what that can actually bring to the table. Diversity creates much better creative ideas than everybody that has been thinking in exactly the same way. So actually it was, I think, a really great thing that I didn't come down the traditional route. So after Iris, I moved to a much smaller agency where things were incredibly fast-paced, and was where I actually became a solo. So that means that I now wrote the copy and did the visuals, and simultaneously started to lead creative teams and projects. So this is where I became creative director, and I worked closely with the NHS and the Mayor of London. And that as well was a really interesting opportunity for me, because working especially with the Mayor of London, it was the first time in my career where I had been working to sell a purpose, whether that was kind of equal opportunity for women in London, or there was another brief about promoting a positive sentiment after Brexit when London definitely didn't vote for Brexit. So it was really the first time I was selling a purpose rather than a product. I now am freelance, so that means I work for myself. I go into different brands and agencies to lead their creative campaigns, and I've since worked with Refinery 29, Lego, Wix, and I'm currently working on a brief for Nike. So I thought I would just show you some of my favourites that I've worked on in the past. First of all, I've spoken quite a lot about this equal opportunities for women brief for the Mayor of London, so I wanted to show you a couple of pieces from that. The brief lasted for a whole year, and each piece of content created had a slightly different aim or audience. So this first one that I'll show you was targeted at business owners, to make them aware of the situation, acknowledge the problem, and tell them of a government initiative that was launching to help with the problem.
Thank you. Gents, you can take it right to the top. Thank you very much. Ladies, take the stairs, please. Stairs. Gents, take the escalator. Ladies, take the stairs, please. Gents, take the escalator. Ladies, take the stairs, please. Don't mind. Over here. Up the escalator. Ladies, take the stairs, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Gents, go up the escalator if you want. Shut the escalator. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies, can you take the stairs, please? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's just the way it is, yeah. It is. Stairs, please. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's just the way it is. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Gentlemen, you take the escalator, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
In 2018, the path to leadership is still too slow. We need more women leaders in London to make our city even more successful. This is our time to support more women from all backgrounds into leadership roles.
Cool. And then I also just wanted to show you this second one, which again was for the same brief, but it just goes to show how different the creative was. So part of the challenge of this year-long brief was to continually refresh the creative, even though the brief stayed the same. But this particular one was then now targeted at the general public. We wanted to really get them excited about an incredible summer ahead of women's sport when there was so much focus purely on men's sport. And this film that you're about to watch the whole film was put together purely just by the sounds of sport that you'll hear. And then finally, I just wanted to take you through something on the much more trivial end of the spectrum. This was a film for Shell, who wanted to promote their barista style new coffee range that would be available in petrol stations across the country. The idea behind this was that every journey tells a story, whether you're kind of taking the kids to school or whether you're on your way to work or whatever it is. And it's just worth saying that every pot of coffee that you'll see in this film was real, and it was created by the world's leading latte artist, if you ever knew that there was such a thing as that. So yeah, it wasn't computer generated at all.
Oh.
So yeah, also just to say, the reason I wanted to show you that final one was because for me, this project really lands the point I was making before about how important the craft is in the charm of an idea. The fact that this film was entirely made up of real shots of coffee, like every animation that you see happening in a shot of coffee was a new pot of coffee that was genuinely created and shot. For me, that's a difference in how good an idea is versus if it had just all been computer generated, it would have really completely lost its charm. So just to kind of reiterate that the craft really does make a difference. And then just to end, I just wanted to take you through some top tips. So first of all, and Nicola mentioned this earlier, but create opportunity. So even if you can't see it, seek it out, what it is you want to do, make connections and just create the opportunity for yourself. And even if it feels completely not relevant to anyone there and then, it will kind of come back to help you in the future. Secondly, embrace whatever it is that makes you different. As I said, my path to the creative department was completely different from anyone else there, but actually it's what set me apart and has held me in really good stead. Exercise your creative brain. So genuinely, the more you think of creative ideas, the better you get at it. And a really good place to get started is a Twitter account called 1 Minute Briefs. I used to do these all the time. Every day they will set a really simple brief, like advertise toothbrushes, advertise fruit. and you have 60 seconds to think of an idea. So it's really top line, but it really is incredible to see the breadth of creative that comes out of that. And yeah, genuinely, you get better the more you do. And finally, ask questions. The root of this industry is curiosity, and really, I believe that the best ideas are rooted in absolute human truths. They're real insights, and the creative is just kind of telling their story. So a lot of the time you'll find those insights by just scratching beneath the surface. So make sure you ask questions and just see what you find. So I think that leads me on quite nicely to just hand over back to you and asking if you have any questions which you can think about, and I think we'll answer shortly.
Brilliant. Oh, lovely. Thank you. I was just waiting for it to hand over back to me. That's fantastic. Thank you. I loved watching those animations and, you know, hearing your journey, and the fact actually that you didn't do the traditional, you know, the graphic design, advertising, marketing course, but did psychology, but used your sort of love of people and interest in, you know, what makes people think, what makes people tick, and also the work that you had to do to get into being the creative side of things. So it's really, really fascinating, and yet another perspective on this really, really interesting career that we've been hearing about. So thank you to all of the speakers. It's been really fascinating. We have got a few questions, but before I come on to those, I'm going to hand over to Camilla Hannon, Head of Careers, who's going to talk about a few routes into this career. Okay, over to you, Camilla. Thank you.
Can I have my first slide, please, Ellie? Okay, so I'm actually going to start by flagging up what do I know, but what I've always thought of is rather a kind of badly designed website, and it's one I do often direct the Manchester High students to, because it is a really, really good careers resource. But I think I don't know what our three speakers think, but it just looks to me as though it needs a bit of an update, a bit of a rebrand. But it is one I kind of go back to quite a lot, because it is really good, despite the fact that it kind of needs updating and looking at again. So I just want to flag it up really, because it's not the most exciting careers resource or careers website around. There's others which are a lot more kind of appealing looking, but it is worth a look, whatever you're interested in really, because it just has a lot on it. So I've just put up the page on graphic design just as an example. You can also search through vacancies as well if you're at that point, you know, in the process of thinking about careers. The other one that relates to tonight is the section on advertising, which is grouped together with marketing and PR. And it also has a lot of really, really useful kind of information, and it will guide you towards apprenticeships, university courses, work experience, ideas for getting work experience, and so on and so forth. So prospects, it's really useful. Yeah, not the most appealing website, but a really, really useful one. Next slide, please, Ellie. So just to come back to what a couple of the speakers have already mentioned, and what Liv was saying, Liv chose to study psychology as her degree, and I'm sure that many people who work in this field would tell a similar story of having not studied graphic design or even anything that's connected with art or design, but having come from a different kind of direction. But I have picked for my one example of a degree course, I have picked a graphic design course, and I nearly went to Leeds because a couple of years ago I was at the School of Design for a kind of careers session, and I was really impressed with it. But I'm kind of glad I went somewhere different because we've talked a little bit about Leeds. So I picked the University of the Arts London, and in terms of this as a university, it is one university, but it's a little bit different because it's actually 6 different colleges, and Camberwell College of Arts, which hosts this degree, is one of them. It's massive. It has over 19,000 students, a lot of international students, and it ranks very highly in the world rankings, which they're very keen on advertising. It was described by Grayson Perry, who was their chancellor, who possibly still is their chancellor, as the world's biggest factory for making trouble, which I quite liked. And it covers Central St Martin's and the London College of Fashion. And there's any number of creative degree courses taught across UAL. And I've picked the kind of straight graphic design, but it's worth, you know, if you're interested in this area, it's worth looking at the detail of these degree courses, because there are so many of them. It's really quite amazing what's out there. This one it's a 3-year degree, and in terms of the entry requirements, it's a bit different from maybe some other degrees. You can come into it from a foundation arts degree or just with A-levels. They do have a requirement for A-levels. It's relatively low, but the only reason for that is because they're more interested in your portfolio, and they're quite specific and explicit on their website about what they're looking for in terms of the portfolio. And the biggest criteria for selection is that the portfolio can you can communicate your ideas both verbally and visually as well. So it's worth having a look if you're interested in applying to similar courses. It's all gone digital now, which probably isn't surprising. So you submit a digital portfolio, and then if they like your portfolio enough, they'll invite you to an interview, which is online. But that is the way things are going. And you apply through UCAS for that one. But like I say, there's many degrees, all slightly different, and obviously you can work in this field having studied something else, as Liv has already said. Next slide, please, Ellie. So we've mentioned a little bit different routes into this career, and the obvious alternative to going to university is a degree apprenticeship. And there are degree apprenticeships. They don't tend to be in pure graphic design, or not that I've been able to find, but there are plenty in marketing, particularly digital marketing. There are lots and lots of these, and too many to really discuss, and there's more every year. The thing about degree apprenticeships is that they're harder to research, I would say, than ordinary university courses. So just look very carefully, look at who's providing the teaching, and look at who's actually doing the employment side, the work experience side, and how many years you'll spend, what they'll pay you, whether they'll commit to employing you at the end, and so on. There are also a number of graduate schemes which centre around marketing and brand, and I found quite a few of these and some information from the prospects resource. Some of the ones which were most maybe best paid, I suppose, to be honest, were Centrica, Nestle and Virgin Media. So I picked Centrica purely accidentally, because I know that's been in the news in the last few days for their vast profits that they're making from our energy bills. But I better not get into that. The one with Centrica is 2 years, and the requirement is that you have a 2-1 in any degree whatsoever, which I thought was interesting. They really don't mind what you've studied at university. They're looking for a 2-1, and in fact, if you've got a master's as well, they'll take you with a 2-2. So your degree course, you could go off and study anything that you were interested in, that you were passionate about, and then pick up with one of these graduate schemes. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. The next one. So I liked this, obviously coming at it as someone who doesn't really know anything about the technicalities, but this is a blog from a college which is actually in Manchester, and it's just dated from about a week ago. And it was an interesting read for me because it kind of highlighted how you need a combination to be a graphic designer, a combination of really technical skills, which are all listed in this blog, and a lot of them were things. Some of them were things that I had heard of, like Adobe, which I think a couple of you mentioned, which I imagine are changing all the time. So that's I don't know if that's true. I imagine that kind of Adobe must be something that's updated. Mr. Vance would be able to talk about this much more competently than me. But it was good for the way it talked about the technical skills, and then also the non-technical skills, which I suppose could be like the soft skills, creativity, communication, creativity, which Liv has talked about a lot, strategy, problem solving. So it was an interesting read. I certainly felt as though I understood a little bit more about graphic design after I'd read through the blog. And to finish off, for those of you who've your enthusiasm has been sparked by tonight, you can certainly start acquiring some of those technical skills if you're doing your graphics GCSE or your graphics A-level. But you can also acquire some of the non-technical skills as well by your extracurricular activities. So, Young Enterprise, writing for Onward or your school newspaper if you're at a different school. There's so many opportunities at school for making posters or doing presentations, taking part in competitions to design things. I can think of quite a few that are out at the moment, house competitions or departmental competitions, designing logos. And like so many people have said, take those opportunities. You can start taking them now. You don't need to wait till you're at university or till you've graduated. And that really brings me to the end of my part. So I'm going to hand back to Sarah.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you very much. That's really fascinating. And I like that you had a whole range there of routes into this career, because as we know, we're very much broadening out the idea about what constitutes kind of educational pathways into careers, or just to study what you're interested in studying. It doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional route of going to university, which of course is still out there. And particularly in a field like this, which is, changing all the time, which is very much to do with sort of contemporary skills, technical skills, responding to society, social media, all of these things which are kind of ever changing, ever evolving. So you have to have a lot of flexibility and adaptability. And so I think, perhaps a different route into it would also sort of speak to those skills as well. But there's a whole range of courses out there, and anyone who's at the point of having to start thinking about that, certainly here at school, we do a lot of work supporting students with that. So we'll be talking to particularly year 12s about all of that very soon. We've got a couple of questions actually, and I think if I could just maybe turn to Ali to one, and just, you kind of talk, and it's to do with freelancing, and because you had quite a bit of talk of freelancing, somebody was just asking, what is a typical day in a freelancer? Obviously there's the day when you go to the gym and do all your lovely stuff, but if you're getting up in the morning and you're freelance designing something, what do you actually do in the day for that person, that company, that brief?
Yeah, so I would say that, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I would say that a day of freelancing can really change, depending on whether it's a big client or even just a family friend who wants a logo doing. And I'd also say that it changes based on whether it's through an agency or if it's something that you've gone out and sought yourself. It can either be really full on, or you can find yourself like not even having a brief and you logged on at 9 o'clock and they've still not sent you anything by midday. But yeah, like usually you'll get a brief from the client, and you'll need to work to that, and it can be really extensive, or it can also just be a really short brief, and from that you'll sort of do the work that's required. But yeah, sometimes it can be like months worth of work that's like a massive project, or it can just be like half a day of work, but that is kind of what makes it really exciting.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, I think it's what's become really apparent is it's so varied. And you might, and I think your answer was sort of spot on from just an outsider's point of view. It sounds like it's really varied, and it's very much dependent on what the nature of the work is that you yourself do, but also what the brief is and what the time frame is and all of those things. I've had a couple of questions about work experience. Now, what I seem to have picked up from what you've all said about going from school to college to university, is that at school you followed your passions, you did what you were interested in, you kind of played to your strengths, you chose courses that you enjoyed. A couple of you I know did graphics or related at university, and then we had the psychology, and it was really seemed to be that when you got to university was where you maybe did internships or, you know, entered competitions and things like that. But a couple of questions about sort of work experience, and we know we like to encourage our younger students, our students who are, you know, pre-university age, to find some work experience. Do any of you have any tips about how students might go about finding work experience? Is it a case of just writing to agencies, or if anyone has any tips? Nicola's nodding, so so I'm just going to hand over to Nicola and see if you know what she'd like to say. Okay.
Yeah, I think a couple of us actually touched on these ideas in our presentations, and I think in terms of work experience, and it's kind of, again, this idea of you kind of sometimes have to make these opportunities for yourself, and so my suggestion is LinkedIn was mentioned. I use LinkedIn all the time for job searching, for inspiration, and I think it's a really, really useful tool for you to get engaged with very early on. So I would suggest create a LinkedIn, start building your personal portfolio, either create a social media page, or if you can, create a website and feature some of the work that you might have done. So, you know, I think from my time doing Onward or helping to design materials for Mun High, that was enough to put into a portfolio and start to build that. And then be a bit bold, reach out to people, seek out opportunities. I managed to make an opportunity for myself when I was at university with a startup dancewear brand. I knew they were starting up, and I knew it was just her, and I wondered whether she'd need any help. So I reached out to her, I sent her my portfolio and suggested how I could help, and I'm still working with her on a freelance basis now. And it's all just about kind of maybe being a little bit cheeky, putting yourself out there, and being brave, like I said before. So definitely LinkedIn and portfolio would be really helpful. And yeah, reach out to people, try and get some opportunities.
Great, thank you. That sounds really useful. And I know that Ms. Hannon just mentioned actually all the competitions in school. So some of you may not be from our school, you may be from other schools, but there are always opportunities as well as the ones that have been mentioned. I love the idea on Twitter of this 1-minute briefs. It's almost like something you could get in the habit of doing, just do it every day. But in terms of finding those opportunities, just start with what's kind of right there in front of you, which is entering competitions, designing things, creating a portfolio, taking photographs, etc., looking at some of the websites that Ms. Hannon's mentioned. And then for us, we are having a futures fair, a careers fair at school in middle of March, so 14th of March. I'm not exactly sure who our presenters are yet at the moment. We're gathering them as we speak. But certainly keep your eye out for information about that, because there'll be people there that you can talk to, that if they're not in specifically this industry, that's something related. But I think it's about being creative yourself and about creating those opportunities for yourself by designing and things like that, and taking part in any sort of opportunities that come your way. I don't know if any of the other speakers, if you just give me a wave, if you have any ideas that extend beyond what Nicola said, but if not, then that's fine. I think I can just move on to, we have a final question, which has kind of been answered, but it was talking about extracurricular activities. And, you know, how sort of important is it to take part in extracurricular activities? And I just wonder whether if maybe if Olivia, you, because I know you didn't go straight into this graphic design at university, it's become your career later on, maybe if you did any extracurricular activities at school or sort of during sixth form that you think, well, with hindsight, of a great benefit to you in what you do now.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I'm just always been very interested. Am I on mute? No, can you hear me? I've always been very interested in people, and the way our minds work, and so obviously just in doing psychology in itself, that I think that is a very open degree. You know, I use that every day in what I do in the creative field, but equally I could be in a completely different field, and you know, human interaction still comes into it. But specifically about extracurricular, I mean, I would just say 100% go for whatever interests you, whether it's kind of horse riding or sailing or nothing sport related and it's gaming, or you know, absolutely anything that you do, however random it is, I think can give a fresh perspective, and can kind of just add to the thing that makes you you, which everyone, you know, is interested in. And as I said before, it's all these like little components which are, you know, made up of, yes, they're made up of our academic side and our schooling and everything, but it's also all the things you do on a personal level, you know, your friends and socializing and the extracurricular, you know, sports or activities or art or whatever that is. It all makes you different and who you are. And then when you're thinking of ideas, if it is in that field or whatever, it can, you know, you bring something different to the table. So yes, definitely, however unrelated it might seem now, I would definitely embrace any extracurricular thing that you might be interested in.
That's brilliant, thank you. I think that's really helpful, and there are so many opportunities in school that people can take advantage of to develop themselves, but also things that might be bringing in some of those more direct sort of talents and skills that relate to the careers that we've been talking about. So there are just a couple of things that I want to sort of say at the end. First of all, I'd just like to give a shout out and a thank you to Mr. Bantz, because I know he's been on this call. I don't know if he still is, but you know, the one sort of connection between all of these students and their brilliant, successful careers is Mr. Bantz, and other members of the school certainly, but he's been mentioned, and so thank you, Mr. Bantz. And I know that the students are obviously remembering you really, really fondly. And as head of UCAS and also Miss Hannon in careers, we do work with Mr. Bantz a lot in terms of supporting students to get into these types of courses. So thank you to Mr. Bantz and other teachers as well who help out with that. We've had a question actually about any other short courses that students might be able to do, and certainly something that we advocate in our sixth form, but there's no reason why younger students can't do it, is MOOCs, and we can talk more about that in school, you know, as and when is appropriate, but mass open online courses, and a lot of universities run them. And if you're on Unifrog, you just put in MOOCs and put in creative design, graphic design, media, advertising, all these kinds of ideas, and see what comes up. There are loads of little short courses out there. Most of them, in fact, there will be free ones that you don't have to pay for. You shouldn't pay for any of these. So you can have a little look on there. But if you are a member of our school, just pop a question maybe in the futures team, which is open, I think, to all students in the school, and we can answer that for you about just looking at some MOOCs to do with that. You could also perhaps ask your art or graphics teachers if they have any, or can they show you how to maybe access some MOOCs. So those are kind of all of the questions. So thank you so much. I would like just to thank all of our speakers tonight. It's been amazing to hear about your fantastic journeys and your wonderful careers, and it sounds like you're all really enjoying what you do and seem really fulfilled and happy with it, which is wonderful. That's what, you know, it's what you want people, you know, in their lives. I'd like to thank Miss Hannon for the input that she's had into looking at the different routes into hello, Mr. Betts, he's just put a message into routes into this career. And also finally to Ellie for the sort of technical stuff behind the scenes, which is always quite tricky, but thank you very much for that. And on that point, we'll be sending out a survey. It's very, very short form. It'll take a couple of minutes to fill in, just with some questions about the Insight Intos as we start to plan for next year's Insight Into programme. But without further ado, thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to Mr. Bantz. And if you have any further questions, if you want to just email them to Ellie, she'll be able to pass them on. So thank you very much, everyone, and good night. Thank you for coming.